Well, welcome to WAG and Wisdom. We're going to talk all about the e-collar today. Um, I think the e-collar is kind of a taboo, either love or hate, and dog owners love or hate, which I completely understand both sides. So I'm going to go through what our agenda is going to be. So we're going to talk about what an e-collar is, how we make e-collars a positive, how leash pressure is pivotal to making the e-collar work, talk about the working level of an e-collar, the applications of an e-collar and e-collar training, some common myths and truths about e-collars, and then I have some success stories that I can share that I've used the e-collar in, and it's been a game changer and a lifesaver. And we're also going to talk about ethical training practices when it comes to e-collars, as there are both trainers that are ethical and unethical when they use e-collars. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. But if you guys have any need to clarify something along the way, I'm also happy to answer so you don't lose your train of thought. You're going to notice that my presentations are really wordy, and there's a couple reasons for that, but I think the main one is that this gets sent out to you, and if you only have bullet points, sometimes it can be hard to go back to what the actual thought was. So this is a lot of information on here that you'll be able to read and know what I'm talking about. So what is an e-collar? An e-collar or electronic collar is a remote training tool, and it's designed to enhance communication between dog and handler. And when used the right way, it provides clear, consistent cues through a sensation similar to a TENS unit, which is something that's often used in physical therapy for muscles. Some of you may have experienced that before, some of you may not, but it is like a light stinging slash tingly sensation. It's not really an ouch. Sure, you could probably turn one of those machines up all the way and it could hurt some people, and some people might say that it feels good, maybe similar to a tattoo, but it is not the traditional shock that people think. So what an e-collar is not, it's not a punishment device. It's not a shock collar. Yes, there are shock collars that exist. Those are usually the cheap, unregulated versions that are on Amazon or some off-brand website, because there's no regulation on what those devices actually do, and those do cause pain and confusion in dogs. And it's not a replacement for training. I think oftentimes people associate e-collars with this is just a, if anything, it takes 10 times longer because a lot of the times e-collars are used for like off-leash reliability, and that's not an overnight thing. No matter if you're using an e-collar or not, it's months and months of using it and conditioning it and pairing it with actual training in order that we're looking for. An e-collar is a tool for off-leash reliability and safety in some situations, and it's a way to fade leash pressure and provide clear, consistent cues. And when I say consistent, it's the same across the board, right? If you're using the same overlater and working numbers, but if you're using the same number on your dog, it's the same feeling every single time. If you have a multi-person household and one person grabs the leash and, let's say, gives collar pressure, it might be different than the next person that grabs the leash and gives collar pressure. All of those are different because we're all different. This is a way to keep that 100% consistent across the board. It feels the same and means the same when you make it mean something to the dog. It is a method to enhance training, not replace it. You cannot just slap an e-collar on a dog and your dog just knows what to do. There are people, both, that do just put the collar on the dog and expect that the dog knows exactly what to do, without actually training it to do a behavior. and that would be a wrong application of an e-collar. And it is an effective option for reactive, anxious, or working dogs. When you properly introduce the e-collar, an extension of the leash. It's not a tool to force obedience, and the goal is to create clarity, not fear. We often call it a Bluetooth leash in dog training because that's essentially what it's supposed to be, not this big scary tool to intimidate our dogs with. How do we make e-collars a positive? So this is super important, and I will go over this more in depth later on in the presentation. But again, um, there are good ways to use the e-collar and there are bad ways to use the e-collar. Call them pure positive trainers, right? Which I find myself kind of in the middle of both of these that I'm about to explain. You have pure positive training, which is trainers that primarily believe in positive reinforcement only and very little to no corrections. And then you have aversion trainers, and those are dog trainers that use heavy corrections and are typically, we call them e-collar only trainers also, which are dog trainers that slap e-collars on every single dog, no matter what the goals are, no matter what the owner wants, and they use those as a way to punish the dog if they're not complying or obeying with what they're told to do, and not typically teaching them what to do prior to that. I am neither of those things. I heavily believe in positive reinforcement and I use it with every single dog that I work with. I think it is a great, great piece of dog training. And I do use corrections when needed based on the dog. I think balanced training is being able to customize your training for each specific dog because they're each individuals. And we see this in humans too. There's not one size fits all to teaching a human. Each human, there's some humans that might learn visually. There's some that might be able to just read something and get it right off the bat. And I believe the same thing when it comes to dogs. So the way that I use e-collars is I always condition them to mean something positive, right? So I want them to feel happy when they put these tools on, any tool, no matter what it is. The collar should be associated with good things before training even starts. So again, I don't just put the collar on and then start using it because the dog has no idea what this feeling is. So the e-collar, um, associating it with good things is a way to make them happy to put it on. And we do that by, we could put the collar on and then feed dog treats or meals. You can put the collar on and engage in play, something that's going to increase their dopamine and make them excited. So that way they create a positive association. We avoid making the e-collar feel like a cue to obey. It should feel supernatural, like putting on any other collar on the dog. And then the remote should never be shown to the dog or used as a threat. I think there's kind of a, you might have seen videos out there, and I'm going to call out my own mother in this, okay? Because my mom doesn't listen to me with dog training, so we don't talk about dog training. But she has a an e-collar for her dogs because her dog is a very loud, obsessive barker and whiner. And no matter how many times I told her, I say, don't show the dog. The dog thinks that the remote has to exist in order to stop doing whatever the dog is doing. Gets a vibrate, by the way, doesn't actually get a correction with it. The collar just vibrates and it interrupts her obsessive barking. So she just shows the remote and the dog just stops barking. And that's not what we want. We don't want to really associate that feeling even with us. Um, but we certainly don't want to use the remote that it comes with as a threat. We're not trying to threaten our dogs to not do something. We're trying to teach them. Step two would be layering with e-collar cues. The dog has to know what we're training them to do, right? It's not, they don't just magically understand. So we do that through leash guidance. So the e-collar is added as an extension of leash prep pressure, not a replacement of leash pressure. Eventually, we fade the leash pressure, and the dog responds to gentle e-collar stimulation alone. But you can always fall back onto that leash pressure if they ever are in a new situation where they might be struggling. You always have that tool because you've trained the behavior. So they know to follow leash pressure also. Step 3 would be finding the dog's working level, which I will go in depth on, but you always start at the lowest level and you increase slowly. So, for example, I use a brand called Ecollar Technologies, and you might have seen these in videos on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. And there's a circle remote that's used. Those devices are high quality e-collars. They're not cheap, I'm not going to lie. And there are a few out there that are high quality that are true e-collars. That device goes up to 99. And you might be thinking, oh my God, I can't imagine turning this device up to 99 and my dog not having some sort of response. Um, each dog has their own working number. And I would say most dogs that I've worked with are between 1 and 10 on a quality e-collar. High drive dogs, though, when you think of dogs like Belgian Malinois or Beaucerons or, really super intense, like they are just super into what they're doing. I have seen those dogs work on an 80 or a 90, and they have the same physical response and emotional response as a softer dog that responds to a 1 to a 10. And there's a lot of factors in that. And part of that is when you have high drive dogs, they tend to lose sensitivity because they're so interested and aroused with what they're doing. They feel a lot less physically. So the working level changes with each dog. I can't put an e-collar on a dog and say for sure what your dog's level is. We have to look for what that working number is. And we do that by putting it on, and we slowly increase that level. And the correct level is when the dog shows the mild awareness of the feeling. That could be like an ear flick, or sometimes there should never be a dog that yelps. There should never be a dog that's, trembling in fear. That is a sign that number is way, way too loud. I have rarely seen a dog that has shown that response between that 1 and 10 level. If they do, if I turn it to a 1 and a dog has that much of a physical response, then I typically suggest that we don't use the e-collar on that specific dog. This is just continuing on making e-collars a positive, which would also be we prevent rehoming and euthanasia a lot of times by introducing e-collars into training. Back in California, Rachel and I partnered with several rescues to try to help their dogs that were not getting adopted or that were frequently returned be able to be placed into homes and be successful. That's something that we are super passionate about. So many dogs with severe behavioral issues like reactivity, anxiety, aggression are often at risk for being rehomed or euthanized, whether that's shelter or rescue. And those places often struggle with placing high energy or reactive dogs. And so the e-collar can kind of give that owner, the new owner, and even the rescue or the foster that proper training and that way to kind of control those dogs to make them and help them become more adoptable. Owners who feel overwhelmed with their dog's behavior can use e-collar training as a structured solution, which can prevent them from being surrendered to shelters or rescues. And I do have an example later on of a specific case of a dog we worked with that I'll show you a video on and show you the success story. When e-collars may not be the right choice. So while e-collars are effective for most dogs, they might not be suitable for dogs with extreme physical sensitivity who shut down at even the lowest level. Again, I talked about dogs that are showing like a big emotional response to like a level 1 or a level 2. I'll typically just say we're going to shy away from that, and we're not going to force it on them. right? If a dog is not feeling it, we're not going to force them to be okay with it. We have to respect that that just might not be the tool for the dog. And instead of using stimulation as a correction, it serves as a gentle. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped ahead a little bit. Um, so when e-collars might not be the wrong choice, dogs who have had previous traumatic experiences with proper improper e-collar use, which I do have another case of a dog that went to an aversion trainer who dog, and anytime the dog would get distracted by another dog, it wasn't reactive, but just super interested in other dogs. They turned it up to a high level and they would shock the dog anytime that they saw another dog, and it created a reactive dog. Because of that, this dog ended up having so much anxiety in the presence of other dogs because it was worried about doing something wrong, that it ended up creating this generalized anxiety overall in the dog. And these owners paid for 4 weeks of a board and train with these trainers, and they were handed the e-collar at the end of the program and said, anytime she doesn't listen, you press the button. And honestly, this was probably one of the saddest cases I've ever worked with. And she was a tough cookie to crack. And when she got to us, we did a 2-week board and train because we did not want to overwhelm her. Um, we did, when the owners dropped the dog off with us, they had the e-collar on, and we could see them using it improperly coming up to the house. And anytime the dog would go maybe even a foot ahead, the dog was pulling the whole time. But anytime the dog would go a foot ahead, it broke my heart because these owners love their dog so much, and they could tell that this was not working and it was not the right way, and they hated doing it. But they had trusted a dog trainer to tell them, hey, this is what worked, and this is how you get the behavior. It got to the point where when we had her, we took the e-collar off completely. We ditched it. We were like, she's already had a really bad experience. And when we were working with her on recall, she was so conditioned with that e-collar the wrong way that when you recalled her, she just did this, whether the e-collar was on or not. So that's a situation that I'm not going to reintroduce the e-collar because she had such a strong impression, bad impression of it, that it was messing with her mental state. She became just a super anxious dog because of that improper use. And another time that it might not be the right choice are handlers who are unwilling to learn proper technique, and improper can create confusion, and it can harm your relationship with your dog. And I am not about that. I have had people, potential clients, come up to me and they are wanting to just slap the e-collar on and not willing to learn how it is with those clients, and I am not willing to work with those clients. I am a huge advocate for the dogs in each training situation. So that's another situation that it's just not the right choice to use an e-collar. And then lastly, it's good training for deaf dogs. Really think about it. If you don't have a deaf dog, why would you? But I actually am working with a dog right now who is a husky mix, who is completely deaf and is reactive and has all the things, And we're starting to implement the e-collar. If the owner would to come and like touch right behind them, the owner would get bit by the dog because the dog would get startled. So we're starting to implement the e-collars a way, to get the owner to not get bit because the dog is getting startled, but gently starting to layer it into some other training that we've done to make it predictable for the dog so that the dog can respond to cues and we can get their attention without providing unnecessary stress to them. So instead of using stimulation as a correction, it serves as a gentle tap to get their attention. E-collar cues with specific hand signals too for recall, sit, down, stay. And an example would be a deaf dog playing off leash can feel the vibration cue and immediately check in with the owner because we've paired that vibration cue with a check-in. And I've seen the owners as well. So, conclusion, e-collars are not about control. They're about communication and freedom. And when you introduce them correctly, they give dogs ability to enjoy life with fewer restrictions, more confidence, better your bond with your dog. Working level. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth on that because I feel like this is probably the most neglected piece of e-collar training. Again, people just put it on the dog and then expect that the dog knows, kind of messing with the dial and hoping that the number they land on is the right number for their dog. So every dog has a unique sensitivity level, again, just like humans would. So finding their working level is important part of e-collar training. And the goal is to use the can perceive without stress or fear. So the step one would be to start at the lowest possible level. So you would turn the e-collar on and you would set it to level 1. And then you would slowly increase that level one number at a time until the dog shows a subtle, and it's not an ouch, it's not cowering, it's not shaking, it's just noticing that there's a feeling. And that the correct working levels when the dog pauses, flicks the ear, looks around, again, never startled, yelps, show fear. If you skip too many levels and you go a little bit too high and your dog does that, you start back over at 1, 2. Don't just go down. You start back at 1 and you slowly work your way up. Step 2 would be to understand that sensitivity varies. Again, most dogs work between 1 and 10 on high quality e-collars, but high drive or confident dogs might work at higher levels, up to 99. I know that sounds really scary when you say it out loud. Level 99, again, sounds like a terrible number. But those dogs that are super high drive, that just have less physical sensitivity overall, sometimes the higher levels are the only thing that they feel. And again, it's just going to feel like a poke. Um, and then working levels can change depending on the environment, excitement, or distractions. I think that's super important too. Um, I've had dogs that are, let's say, working at a 4, generally going to the same park and we're doing the same exercises. But then we go to, let's say, a farmer's market, and the dog, if the dog is a more sensitive dog, might feel more in those moments. So we just turn the working level down and we problem solve that in the moment as well. So normally if it's working on a 4 or 5, we go to a 1 or a 2, and it generally transfers pretty well. And you want to recheck the working levels regularly. Um, Again, dogs adapt and change over time, and you might be doing something new, but if the dog ignores cues in a new environment, um, you might have to increase the working level by 1 or 2, and it's not going to be an extra 10. Usually it's just 1 or 2 on top of the normal working level. And if the dog seems hesitant or avoids engagement, the level may be too high. So they might not be exhibiting fear or stress, but typically means that you are just using too high of a number. Then you're going to go back down to 1 and again work your way back up. And then the e-collar should always be a clear communication tool, not something the dog fears. There are some people that are using it improperly, maybe even accidentally, and they go to put the e-collar on and then the dog just kind of backs away. That's kind of a sign that you either didn't condition it well enough in the beginning, or it's starting to associate it with something negative, which again, we do not want. And you got to go back to step 1, which is reconditioning that e-collar, which is putting it on, feeding them, putting it on, playing with them. We want them to be happy to put any tool on that you put on your dog, whether that is an e-collar, a flat collar, a gentle leader, a harness, a prong collar, any of those things your dog should be happy to put on. There should be no aversion to it. And finding that working level is going to make the e-collar an effective training aid that just enhances their learning without discomfort. Applications of the e-collar. So some ways that e-collars can be used are, which I would say this is probably the most common, is for recall and off-leash freedom. One of the most valuable uses of the e-collar is off-leash reliability. Living in Oregon, everybody likes going hiking with their dog, going off and doing something fun, going to the river, anything, going to the beach. And it can be such an amazing tool to be able to know that you can release your dog to go have fun, but you also have that confidence that you know they're coming back. There's a dog park here that's called Thousand Acres. It's 1,000 acres of dog park, and if you don't have a strong, reliable recall on your dog, I mean, that's not an easy place to find your dog. The e-collar acts as an invisible leash, again, a Bluetooth leash, and that ensures your dog's going to respond even at a distance. You know, your voice can only carry so much. So if your dog's 100 feet away from you and they're not listening to you, or they're super involved in whatever they're doing, that e-collar stimulation is going to, when properly introduced and paired with the behavior, they're going to turn around and they're going to come right back to you. It's a great tool for safety. Again, dogs can be called away from dangerous situations, and I do have an example to this. When I was living in California, I lived in deserty area where there were tons of snakes, rattlesnakes being a big one of those. And I have a German Shepherd mix, and we were going off onto a hiking trail, and we were in the parking lot, got out of the car, and it's a really quiet area where literally no one went. Got out of the car, released him off leash on an e-collar to start heading on the trail, and he spotted something in the parking lot that looked, honestly, from far away, it looked like a rope toy. I can't really blame him for this. And he beelined it for it. And it only took a couple seconds before I realized that that was not something that he should go towards, and it was actually a giant rattlesnake. And I used the e-collar and was able to recall him back onto us, and thankfully he did not pick it up. So we went to go investigate, and this rattlesnake was the biggest rattlesnake I have ever seen. And it was partially dead, could have still bit, but partially dead. And that's a huge example of making sure that I got my dog back right when I needed him to, not 3 seconds later or 5 seconds later, where he could have then continued to go to investigate and or grab this snake that was in the parking lot. It can also be helpful if you're in an area where there's busy traffic, lots of cars, and your dog's getting away from you, and you know you're at there's a lot of off-leash, unfenced areas in Portland, um, that you can call your dog away if they're starting to run towards traffic or run towards another dog that you don't want them to interact with too, and you know your dog's going to come back to you every time. So super important for safety too. And then helping reactive and aggressive dogs. Many reactive dogs struggle with impulse control. I would say that's probably their number one weak spot, is just being able to control themselves around triggers, whether that's other dogs, strangers, cars, you name it. And e-collar training helps reinforce engagement and focus, which is reducing that reactivity over time. It also can be a way to interrupt that intensity that often reactive or aggressive dogs are exhibiting. Sometimes they get stuck in that negative thought pattern. They kind of hone in on whatever that trigger is, and the e-collar can be a great way to interrupt that. So that e-collar, again, helps reinforce engagement and focus and reduces that reactivity. And when used correctly, it can redirect the dog's attention and prevent over threshold reactions, which in reactive dogs, there's something called trigger stacking, which could be, you know, something as simple as like a dog walked a little bit too close, but that adds one step, and then another dog over time until a dog gets another dog, comes a little too close, and then they explode on that dog. So it can be a way to prevent the dog or redirect the dog from that over threshold reaction. For aggression, the e-collar provides dog needs, and it can reinforce the calm and controlled behavior and prevent dangerous escalations of situations. So then we talk about building confidence in nervous or anxious dogs, which I think this one is kind of are nervous and anxious dogs that are so physically sensitive, like you even touch them in the wrong spot and they have some sort of negative physical response to it. So again, those are times that we don't end up using the e-collar, but I have seen in nervous and anxious dogs it be a game changer too. So that e-collar can give consistent feedback, which helps insecure dogs feel more guided and supported because it's something that they can expect. It doesn't vary. And many nervous dogs find comfort in clear, predictable communication from their handler versus something different every time. Again, we're human beings, right? We can be relatively consistent, but it's impossible to be 100% consistent. So the e-collar is the same feeling every single time. Again, it's something that they can learn to expect, which just kind of makes them feel more secure overall. The low level stimulation can act as like a subtle tap on the shoulder, which can help anxious dogs stay engaged and work through fear-based behaviors. So an example of that would be a fearful dog that's struggling with environmental anxiety to focus on his handlers instead of reacting to every noise. So if you have a hypervigilant dog, sometimes introducing the e-collar and pairing it with like a focus can pretty easily deter them from becoming overinterested or overwhelmed by all the things that they're focusing on. And then another would be reliable obedience and off-leash structure. So dogs with an e-collar understand commands in any situation, regardless of distractions. And remember, they don't just magically learn that. That's something that we train over months to be able to get the dog to generalize in those situations. But this includes sit, down, place, heel, recall, all reinforced at a distance if needed. Because again, we've layered that e-collar feeling with leash pressure to multiple different behaviors. So an example would be a dog holding a downstay in a park despite other dogs running around. The e-collar can reinforce that from a distance, no matter how far you go, which can be super helpful. Myths and truths. I think this one is what most people are waiting for. So myth number one, e-collars are just shock collars that hurt dogs. Modern, high-quality e-collars like e-collar technologies, Dogtra, or Garmin use blunt stimulation that feels very similar to a TENS unit like we were talking about. And when used correctly, the stimulation is mild, not painful, and should never cause distress. Again, those cheap shock collars, I will call those shock collars, um, found on Amazon and stuff, are not the same, and they are not regulated. And I do not work with people that use those either. If someone is not able or willing to purchase a high quality e-collar, I am not the trainer that can help them because I know that it's shocking the dog. I know that it's uncomfortable for the dog. And I'm advocating for the proper usage of e-collars in that situation. Myth number two is e-collars are used for punishment. Proper e-collar training is not about punishment. It's about communication and clarity and over leash pressure and other training techniques. And that guides the dogs to make the right choice. The e-collar acts as an invisible leash rather than a punishment tool. It's not a threat to the dog. There are situations, and I would call them rare situations, collar as quote punishment. And that would be, it was a dog I worked with. He was a rescue lab. His name was Charlie. And Charlie was borderline dealing with pica, which is obsessively eating things that are. And it was to the point where this dog was about to be rehomed. The dog went in the backyard and destroyed their air conditioning unit 3 times in the course of 3 weeks. It ate the cords, which obviously that's an expensive fix for the humans, but that's also a really, really dangerous thing for a dog to do. So this was kind of a last ditch effort to get that dog to be safe and to not be rehomed. And these people were torn up about it. They loved this dog so, so much. So what we did is we put the e-collar on. He didn't associate putting the e-collar on with something negative. We always did something positive with him. And then we let him in the backyard to play. And we sat by a window where you could see the air conditioning unit because at this point he was targeting it. And we waited for him to go to it. And what we did is we put that, again, this is very rare that we actually do this. We call it an act of God correction. And the reason we call it that is, one, we don't want to be involved or associated with it. The remote's not associated with it. The human's not. The dog has no idea the human's even involved in it. And correction that we hope is a one and done, that we never have to use it again. So that means it has to be enough where the dog doesn't try it again. So if this dog's working level was a 3, I believe. The full capabilities of this collar, we went up to a 25. And the second the dog started actively chewing on that air conditioning unit, we pressed the button. He ran away from it. We went outside, we made a huge happy big deal, gave him jackpot treats and reward, started playing with him. He recovered beautifully, and he never touched the air conditioning unit ever again. That saved him from vet visits, potential death due to ingestion, because again, he was eating wires, metal wires, and it prevented him from being rehomed. So there are very specific situations where the e-collar can be used as a correction, but it is a last-ditch effort, and it's usually in life or death situations for dogs. Generally speaking, in e-collar training, it's used as a positive and it's used as a communication tool only. Myth number 3, e-collars make dogs fearful and shut down. Fear and avoidance only occur when e-collars are used incorrectly, like using super high levels of correction without prior conditioning. And properly trained dogs associate the e-collar with positive reinforcement, guidance, and freedom. Because again, the key is layering these on things we've already got the dog proficient in on a leash, and just layering in those low levels to ensure the dog kind of pairs those two things together. But I am going to validate that there are absolutely dogs that are fearful and shut down on e-collars. And more often than not, it's because of improper usage of the e-collar. If a dog is feeling that way again on low levels, and we're doing all the steps to try to make it a positive, and the dog just doesn't feel it, we don't to that degree just to use an e-collar. Myth number 4. E-collars force a dog to obey rather than teaching them. Good e-collar training is based on teaching first, reinforcing second. So before introducing the e-collar, the dog has to understand the commands and the behavior we're asking of them with using leash pressure and positive reinforcement before then using the e-collar. Again, we talked about aversion trainers who put the e-collar on the dog. They put it generally on a higher level. They ask the dog to do a behavior, whether that's a sit, a down, or a stay. If the dogs don't obey or comply, they push it down and they hold it until the dog goes and submits into whatever position they've asked. That's a terrible way to learn. That would be like a teacher asking you to solve a problem and you being continuously yelled at until you got the problem. It's not a healthy learning environment, and it's you wouldn't want to learn that way. You shouldn't want your dog to learn that way either. Myth number 5, e-collars are only for aggressive or bad dogs. Also, I think a common misconception are that dogs only e-collars are used for dogs that are with severe behavioral issues, and that is not true. They help a lot, and again, I'll talk more in depth about our positive story with the e-collar with a rescue we worked with, but they are not for extreme behavioral cases only. They're for all dogs who can benefit from off-leash freedom, reliable recall, and clear communication. Even well-behaved, happy dogs benefit from e-collar training. It allows them to explore safely and go have fun. And it also helps stay connected with you. So it kind of gives dogs more of an opportunity to go off and be dogs while you have that confidence that your dog's going to come back to you. Myth number 6, e-collars should be used at high levels to correct bad behavior. We did kind of just touch base on this, but the goal is always to use the lowest possible level that the dog can perceive, and high level corrections are generally not necessary when the collar is properly conditioned. Most dogs work between some high drive dogs needing a little bit more, but the response should always be neutral, engaged, never fearful, never scared, never ouch. Um, but most high quality e-collars also have a vibration function, and some trainers will use this as a correct, super helpful with reactive dogs in creating an interruption. Um, and there's a lot of dogs that respond to that vibration really well. And it's kind of like doing the engage disengage method. Vibration in there to interrupt them staring or fixating at something, and then you reward them heavily when they look at you. And it can be something that can be done at a distance, not just having the dog right next to you in engage disengage. So it's super helpful in those situations. But again, the high level is really rarely used, only in life or death situations. Myth number 7 is e-collars are unnecessary because positive reinforcement alone is enough. I 100% wish that that was a true statement. I do, because positive reinforcement is an essential tool in dog training. It should be used with every single dog. There are no exceptions of that, but it has its limitations. We can reward the things we want all day long, and it can even make those things continue. But if you don't tell the dog what not to do also, the dog will still test and will still try to do those things, especially in real world situations and scenarios. So the e-collar can provide a reliable way to communicate, but it's not a replacement for rewards, and it's an additional layer of communication to help reinforce trainings. You are able to reinforce more moments sometimes because of the e-collar when it's implemented in those situations. The conclusion of that is that e-collars are a tool, not a shortcut. Again, this is not a tool you slap on your dog and then everything works out the way you want it to. It takes tons of work, tons of conditioning, and time to be able to actually get it to mean what you need it to mean. And a properly induced e-collar should never hurt, intimidate, or force dogs into obeying and complying to a command. It's just supposed to make things a little bit more fun, a little bit more exciting, and to create more freedom overall for our dogs. Okay, here's our real life example. This is Stitch. She was such a unique dog, but she was saved by Ecollar training. And she was a pit mix, as you can see. We think she had some shepherd or some other high drive dog in her because this dog was intense. She went through 10 different foster homes and was adopted 5 times. And she had super high prey drive, severe reactivity to dogs, and specifically had reactivity to men. Um, Generally not women, but specific to men, and extreme pulling on the leash. My gosh, this dog was strong. Guys, kind of her journey that I'm gonna play, but I'm a pretty strong person. I've handled some pretty strong dogs. This dog, I she pulled me. She was tough. The rescue was kind of at a loss. She was on the verge of behavioral. Just did not know what to do with her. This dog was it just kept getting returned, and fosters were not willing to take her on. So we partnered with the rescue, and we gave Stitch that final ditch effort. Um, Stitch was a very fitting name for her, by the way. If you've ever seen Lilo and Stitch, she very much was like Stitch. Um, but we partnered with that rescue. We did a 4-week board and train that actually turned into a 6-week board and train. But we introduced her to e-collar training with structured obedience, and we had to do some behavior modification with her as well because again she had a lot of issues, and no doubt due to her breed, due to her upbringing, and also just being slapped around everywhere. This dog was just, she was so sweet, but she was so intense and so stressed from just having no consistency in life. So her results were life changing. Her recall became reliable, so she was able to go have fun. And I will say, we never did fully off leash with her. Um, she was just, her prey drive was too intense, and she also had some concerns of her being possibly aggressive and not just reactive. So typically with aggressive dogs, we don't ever condone them being fully off leash in situations where you can't be 100% in control. But her obedience was drastically improved. It made her so much easier to handle, and the rescue was shocked that they were able to even walk her. And she became so much more engaged with her person. And you'll see in the video that I show you that in the beginning, she did not look one time at me in the beginning. And as we went on, there was a lot of check-ins. And over, and she was really fun to actually take out and do her video. Give me one sec to share my screen with you guys. Okay. Can you guys all see the video screen before I start playing?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. It was right when she got dropped off. We call this flying a kite because we were flying her at the end of that leash. That was Rachel pointing out that she has, you can see those spikes of hair on her upper back and at the base of her tail. And that's insecurity and intensity. So this was her after training, maybe about 3 weeks into her program. You can kind of see her fall into my body language, and we conditioned that. And the e-collar's on, but it hasn't needed to be used at all because she just kind of was on autopilot at this point. I want to just pause real quick and note her tail. So a lot of people think that wagging tail means a happy dog, and so far from the truth. Um, it really depends on its position, how it's wagging, and you have to also look at the rest of the dog's body. But in the beginning here, I want you to just look at her tail. It's wagging, but it's high and it's tense. It's just whipping all around the place. And I want you to notice its position here. Still wagging, but it's low because it's relaxed. She was living in a constant state of intensity and distress because it was just look, she was looking for things to interact with. So we had to teach her that you got to stop looking for stuff to engage in. So you see that tail, it's nice and happy, but it's low. So this is with triggers present. You saw her in the beginning when there was dogs, probably 25, 35 feet in front of her. And you see us using tons of positive reinforcement because that is a way to reinforce the things that we want. And here she is next to a few of our dogs. And this is Stitch now, happily adopted and enjoying her life going on hiking trails and having fun. Who has not been returned, I will say, I think going on a year back. Let me exit this. Okay. So Stitch was a huge example of how e-collar saved this dog's life. It was pivotal for her avoiding being behaviorally euthanized. She was a really difficult dog to handle for even a dog trainer, but for the average dog owner, she was a lot, and they needed more help than just her being on, even let's say a prong collar, which we didn't end up even using on her. We just used a martingale, and we had the e-collar on her as well. Here is. Ooh. Yeah, she was Jill. I'm gonna hopefully play this first play. Okay, so this dog on the left, his name was Maverick. He was also on the verge of being rehomed by his owner, 90-pound chocolate lab, and he was to the point where he was pulling the owners over. It was a woman, and she had a house full of daughters that were teens, or early 20s, and this dog humped every single one of them obsessively. And not only that, but if they tried to push him off, he would mouth and snarl and bite their arms. And this dog had what was called frustration aggression. So when he was frustrated, he would discharge on his handler, which I saw multiple times in within the first 3 days of having him. And that meant that if you were to give him, let's say, a leash correction, he immediately went to go bite you. So the e-collar was a game changer in that because your hands were nowhere near him. But I will say he had a complete 180 in personality change after doing formal training. He just needed more structure, and we did off-leash work with him, and he was 100% fully off-leash reliable within the 4 weeks that we had him. We were taking him to busy farmers markets, and he was able to walk through with tons of focus. Um, being the leash is dropped over him, you can see in this. So this is just an example of the engagement we got after e-collar training with this guy. And loose leash walking. I mean, obviously I don't even have the leash attached to me, but I really didn't need it. And in this video, we're actually walking down the center of 2 dog parks, and there are dogs on either side. I do have the e-collar remote in my hand, but it's not being used. He's super calm. Look, lots of check-ins, positive reinforcement. We always reinforce the behaviors we like. Just a chill dog. And I'm happy to. He is the light of their life now, and he's doing super good. But like you can see, super relaxed, super calm. There's no like discomfort involved. And he has the freedom. I mean, he could just take off and he could go have fun. But he's choosing kind of to stay within our bubble. And then this one on the right. So this is a dog that we worked with. They had 2 dogs and they were both sisters. We actually worked with the whole family of dogs. They were all adopted to different friends that knew each other, but these 2 lived in the same home, and they were all reactive. They're border collie Aussie mixes, and they were all dog reactive, and some people reactive. And these guys were full-time travelers. Their home state was Washington, but they were traveling down to California to visit those friends who we had already been working with, and they needed help. Obviously, full-time traveling, they are in public essentially all the time, and their dogs were just constantly reacting. There was no escape from it, and these dogs were pretty much just in a constant state of anxiousness and intensity because of that. So we worked with them. They actually stayed by us for 6 months to fully go through all the steps of e-collar training, and it made a huge difference in these dogs. So this was probably about 5 months into their training experience with us, where we were starting to go to real life situations. This is adjacent to a dog park, so you'll see that she's actually she's watching the dog call with the dog, but it's paired with the e-collar. And we used that specific moment of her reacting to practice recall with the e-collar in hopes they could call their dog out of it using a leash or the e-collar.
Ooh, that was perfect. Good.
So you just kind of.
Okay, I'm going to go through that a little bit more slow-mo. So the dog's fixated and interested, and if you attended the recall webinar we had, this video was in it too, because it's a great example of how we teach recall. But this is paired with the e-collar. So the dog gets engaged in the dog. You can see she's kind of getting a little intense, and the owner had impeccable timing. She was literally about to bark and react, and what she did is she paired this tug with the e-collar stim. Anytime now. Tug e-collar stim, and the dog immediately turned and came right back to the owner and disengaged from what the dog was
So you just
reacting
kind
to,
of.
and then was hot to her. So these are examples of where the e-collars can be a game changer for dogs that have those behavioral issues. So our last section here is we're going to talk about ethical and unethical. This one is about the ethical training practices and e-collar training, and what to look for also, whether you hire me to do it or another trainer, what to look for when you're doing e-collar training, and know what questions to ask to make sure they're doing it ethically. So what a good ethical trainer will do is prioritize the dog's understanding. So they're going to ensure that that dog is fully understands commands before introducing the e-collar, and make sure that the e-collar is layered over leash pressure and never used as a shortcut. They're going to positively and introduce the e-collar in a way that associates it with good things, food, play, training, um, to prevent that fear or confusion in the dog. Again, we don't want them to put it on and then associate that they only have to do this when the e-collar's on or the remote is present. We just want them to know what to do and not create that negative association. They're going to use the lowest effective level. So they're going to find the working level of your dog, and they're going to use the lowest possible number they can in any given situation. And that's going to determine that they're using it the right way, not just putting it on, picking some number, or using high numbers and just expecting the dog. They're going to promote clarity, not fear. Again, e-collar is a Bluetooth leash for guidance and reinforcement, not as a punishment. Again, excluding those rare circumstances, but you don't go straight off the bat into that. There's tons of other things to try before you do that method. And then they're going to respect each dog's individuality and adjust that training based on each dog's temperament, sensitivity, training history, and never apply one-fits-all approach. Again, going back to the dog that had that negative association with the e-collar, that was a moment where, as a trainer, you have to realize, even if the owners want it, that it might not be the right choice for the dog, because it's going to provide unnecessary stress and anxiety for the dog. There are ways that you can counter condition that emotional response to it, but at the end, you have to look at, is it worth it to do all that and put the dog through that? And then a good trainer is going to educate, just going to hand it to you and say, okay, here you go. That's not going to give you success, and it's not going to give your dog success. So they're going to make sure that you have a good understanding of that tool and that you humanely and properly. Unethical training. So those trainers are going to use high levels without teaching the dog first. Bad trainers are going to skip the learning phase and they go straight to e-collar for obedience without first teaching the dog what to do. They're going to rely on compulsion and fear, and those uses of the e-collar as a punishment tool rather than a communication tool are going to lead to stress and avoidance and shutdown behaviors. We don't even when we use corrections in dog training, it is not enough to change your dog. It's enough to stop the behavior. You don't want a whole personality change when you correct your dog. You shouldn't have a dog that is fearful of you, that is subdued near you. It's just enough to end that behavior and not completely shut your dog down. An unethical trainer is going to fail to condition the dog properly on the e-collar. They're not going to tell you to pair it with anything positive. They're just going to put it on and start using it. And uses the remote collar as a threat. The remote that comes with the e-collar. I don't see this super often with trainers in general. I would say this is more so dog owners that go and purchase an e-collar themselves and don't know how to use them. They're often just using the remote as a threat. But if a trainer is telling you to use the remote as a threat or is just doing that themselves, that is a big red flag. And an unethical trainer is going to ignore the dog's working level. So they might use random levels or high levels without determining what the dog actually responds to and is comfortable with. And they are going to create fear and learned helplessness, which is really sad if you see it firsthand. With unethical methods often become fearful, shut down, or unpredictable due to lack of clarity and fairness. I do not believe in robot dogs. I am a huge advocate for your dog still being a this perfect citizen that never makes mistakes and never does anything wrong. I think that isn't not a fair thing to expect our dogs to have to comply with and fit into. So we wouldn't expect it of each other, and we can't expect it of our dogs. So e-collar training should be ethical, effective, and humane. Not all trainers use e-collars responsibly, and we don't support trainers who use fear, compulsion, or punishment-based methods. Um, and what that means is that we don't believe in owners or in trainers that solely rely on those things to get behaviors out of dogs. Again, we as balanced trainers believe in punishments and rewards. Punishment doesn't mean hurting your dog, it doesn't mean hitting your dog or being overly mean to your dog. It just means that we hold them responsible for the things we don't want them to do. Um, and that could be as simple as telling your dog no when they get into the cat food, right? That is considered a punishment, is just telling a dog no. But we do not side on the trainers that are just using those guidance and without any positive reinforcement too. So when used ethically, e-collar training is about communication, trust, and creating freedom for dogs. So if you're considering e-collar training, always look for a trainer who follows ethical, dog-centered practices and one who teaches before reinforcing, communicates clearly, and ensures the dog is happy and engaged throughout the entire process of training. And really, you could say that as a whole about dog training. When you pick a dog trainer, they should always be somebody who wants your dog to be happy throughout the process and enjoy training. Not to say there aren't uncomfortable moments where your dog does have to experience discomfort in training, especially when you have a reactive, aggressive, or super fearful dog. They're going to experience discomfort in training, but overall, your dog should be relatively happy, or at least getting to those stages throughout your training process. Q&As. Does anybody have any questions? Jill.
I have a question. So, when I take Daisy on a walk, I'll use the prong collar right now.
Mm-hmm.
Should I be using the e-collar
So
when
not, go ahead, finish your question.
I was gonna say she only really reacts like not all the time, but sometimes like if a dog's barking behind a fence.
So in that situation, I think what you should do with Daisy is restart the process of e-collars. So
Hmm.
I think you need to go back to the beginning, and I think you need to condition her to just associate it with something positive. So you're going to put it on feed, put it on play, you know, create that positive association. And you're not solely relying on it for reactivity right now because we still have to teach her what to do when she's reacting. So
Hmm.
that would mean taking Daisy to, if you know and can predict on your walk when there is that she reacts to, like if it's a dog in a yard that's barking and you know that she's going to react to it, practice recall from that situation. Build up those behaviors, implement the e-collar. Because if she doesn't know what to do
Okay.
in that situation and she just feels the e-collar and she has no clarity on what she's supposed to do, and sometimes that can even increase um, the reaction because she doesn't know what else she's supposed to be doing.
Okay.
Hannah.
Would you use an e-collar for dogs that are barking, like alert barking?
So I try to use the vibrating part of that, part of an e-collar in order to interrupt barking. Alert barking is such a hard behavior because you're dealing with a dog usually that's not like putting thought into it. It's like a visceral reaction that they have when they hear a sound. And um, e-collars can be used as like an interruption. Like you could teach you're familiar with engage disengage, right? That technique. So that your dog looks at something and then you reward them for looking back at you. You can use the vibrate or a really low level to kind of interrupt that and teach them that when they feel that, they look up at you and they get rewarded for that. Um, but e-collars are really hard to use with like a remote collar is really hard to use with alert barking because it's kind of unpredictable when they're going to um, actually hear that sound. And we're human beings, so we could be late, right? So if you don't have that collar in your hand and then the dog starts barking and you're 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds late because you have to find the collar or you have to find the remote, then it's not an effective method when you're dealing with alert barking. Jill?
Okay, this question's for Harvey. So, what should I do to get him used to I put him on independent time every day. Well,
Hmm.
now he knows that when I take out the leash and the collar, he'll like run in his crate and he doesn't want to come out because he knows he's going to have to do independent time.
Well, the first
So,
thing that I would do is close the crates,
okay.
right? So before you even grab those things, close the crate. So he's creating a negative association with those things.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this. We're dealing with some separation anxiety with him, so undoubtedly he's going to dislike his independent time right now. Um, Typically, that's going to subside within a couple weeks of doing this type of training, but there are other ways we can also just make him enjoy it a little bit more, and that could be that when you put him on the independent time, that you are making sure you're super, super rewarding when you first start. So when you
Okay.
put them in that spot, you are going to you can give them that or whatever, and then when he's done with it, you just calmly pick it up, put it away, and then just leave the situation. So that way we're still pausing it. We're still pairing it with something positive, so he doesn't have an aversion to it. So he's not pairing it with something he dislikes.
Okay.
Uh,
Should I lure him because I've been giving him like cheese like before I put the leash on? Like I'll call him over and then make him sit and then put the collar on and then I'll give him a piece of cheese as his reward.
mhm.
Is that
So
okay to do?
I would avoid calling him over because that can, especially if he's already having a
Oh, okay.
negative response, you could kind of mess up your recall
Recall.
when you do that. So instead, I would go straight to getting the cheese and then give him treats for following you, and then go together to go to where the leash is, and you're kind of bringing him to the leash instead of bringing the leash to him.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So that way
Yeah.
he's not, you don't grab it and then he immediately leaves.
Okay.
And then tons of positive reinforcement. Again, avoid calling your dog to things that they don't really love doing, because that's going to break your recall down. So you can kind of mitigate that situation by bringing the dog to the thing versus the thing to the dog.
So should I have him follow me like to the fridge to get the cheese,
Mhm.
and then we walk back to the office?
Yeah.
And then I put the collar on him, and then I take him to his independent spot after.
Yeah, and then I would also do
Okay.
separate sessions, maybe where he can't exit your room, he can't leave, and he can't get into
Hmm.
your crate, where you grab the leash and you give him food. You grab the
Okay.
collar, you give him food, so he doesn't
Okay.
just associate it with that thing that he's not enjoying.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. You have another question?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. Okay, does anybody have any other questions?
No.
Okay. Well, that's it. That's the end of the presentation. I hope I gave some insight into e-collar training that maybe you didn't know before. If you guys have any questions after watching this that you just want to think about and you want to ask, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do that. This will be posted by the end of the day, also in band, so you slides also,
Thank you.
so you guys can just revisit it anytime you want. So I hope you guys have a
Thank you,
great
Matt.
Saturday. Of course. Have a great
Thank you.
weekend.
This was really informative.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
glad.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.